Hello, 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 SureBabe listeners. Welcome back. This is episode 37 and our second episode where Sam and I talk about how our premarital class failed us. Specifically today, we are talking about boundaries and how we both grew up not really knowing what boundaries were and then entered into a premarital class that didn't really know what boundaries were either. So today we talk a lot about how we have learned how to have boundaries individually and also in our relationship, which has protected us personally and has protected our relationship, especially during those heated arguments where we keep wounding one another. So I'll just get right into it. Thank you guys so much for listening. Hopefully this encourages you. And here's Sam and I talking about boundaries. Hello, you guys. Welcome back. This is another couples episode on SureBabe, all about how our premarital class failed us. This is your hosts, Chrissy.
And your guest host, Sam Powers.
I think you're kind of more of a permanent host now, though. Like, I really do think...
I prefer that I'm like a bit actor in this podcast. I show up.
You pretty much named the podcast, so I feel like it's turning more into this marriage/parenting, which is great. I love it. It's the season we're in. It's probably the season you guys are in if you're listening. But we want to instill some hope or insight into your relationship today. So we're going to talk about how our premarital class failed us in specifically the area of boundaries and not teaching us how to have boundaries with one another. And pretty much just overgeneralizing boundaries.
Yeah, we're going to unpack some things that we've found that have been important in our relationship.
Right. Yeah, so...
that we wish we would have learned before we got married.
We would have learned that sooner. So we'll just start with a little quick debrief update. How are you doing, babe?
We're pretty good. A little tired. We got teething children, first week of school.
We have teething children, first week of school. We were actually going to sleep train Ruby this weekend because I have to leave out of town in a couple months, and she has never not slept near us. She's still in our bed. So Sam has sleep trained pretty much our last two kids because he does not have lactating breasts. And it's just easier. It is easier.
It's harder, but it's easier because our kids know that I don't have the equipment to soothe them, so they end up
literally. I talked to Alyssa, the sleep trainer coach that I had on the podcast a couple episodes ago, and she said sometimes it is easier for the man to soothe your baby and put them back in the crib, and so we are going to start doing that.
It's been my job to put the kids to bed for a long time especially with Ruby. No, because I don't.
I put the kids to bed too, though.
Yes, but I'm just saying, like,
okay.
when they're small, no. It's easier for me to put them to bed because they don't. They know they don't get anything from me.
Once our kids turn a year, it kind of morphs into then Sam puts the baby to bed because of that reason. Yeah. Because we're trying to
and we're an egalitarian household, and we try to do things together.
We are,
and are doing away with gender roles.
If you could feed our baby from your breast, you would.
Oh, that's so gross. All right.
No, it's not. Beautiful. But anyways.
I know.
Let's go into boundaries. What do you remember from our premarital class?
As we talked about in the last podcast about the premarital class that we took, and I think they gave us a little bit on boundaries about when you get married, that they painted this picture of like concentric circles going out into bigger circles. And the smallest circle in the center was the married couple. And then the outside circles represented like your family, your friends, culture. And then what it was is that depending on your boundaries, you can only allow so much influence into that center circle of the husband, wife, or the two partners, in that circle. And which is a great analogy, but they really didn't help us in how to actually navigate those boundaries. Because as we've talked about, how whatever family system you grew up in, or family of origin, depending on how your family dealt with boundaries was kind of how you were going to deal with boundaries. But they never got in depth with how that can really affect the way that you are with your partner.
Yeah.
In your relationship, in the day-to-day, disclosure of information and all of that. And
that's so true.
And I think why we're kind of just going over this one is this is probably one of the most, I don't know, I would say overlooked issues in a lot of marriages, that when people get married, it's like, okay, yeah, one partner is going to have a certain set of boundaries. The other partner is going to have a certain set of boundaries that are inherent that we bring in. And then establishing a system of our own boundaries, it's not really taught.
Right. We were just taught not to allow anybody else's influence into our tiny bubble, basically, our marital bubble.
We all know that's
so it was like, your parents are going to have ideas of how you should do things, and you don't need to listen to them anymore, and you need to block all that out and just you be a unit. But then they didn't talk about how you had to have boundaries within your unit, your marital unit. And so every time, and I failed at this, like I called my parents all the time in the beginning about, oh, this is happening and that's happening, because I feel like maybe for a man, it's easier to leave and cleave, so to speak. But I had a really hard time to do that with my parents. Like I still relied on them for so much, like emotional support. And maybe this is just like where you're at, like emotionally as a person, or how emotionally mature you are. But I would say that I had a lot to learn still in the early part of our marriage. And so I probably did overshare with my parents.
I think I'm reading a couple of John Gottman's books about successful marriages, and he talks about, because he shows.
Explain who John Gottman is.
John Gottman is his highly respected therapist. He's got a thing called the Love Lab in Seattle, where they watch couples go and get videotaped, and he can help predict. Like their interactions, not
just videotape their interactions.
Yeah. And what he is he's an observer on the predictors for if your relationship will survive or disintegrate.
Based on how you guys talk to each other.
And it's based on the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, what they call, which are, contempt, criticism, defensiveness, and stonewalling, which are different systems of defense that couples end up putting up. And when those are present in your relationship, your relationship is not as good.
Right.
But he talks about the whole boundaries. Wish I would have read the book first before we got married. But what he really talks about too is about what you share, the information that you share with others will affect your relationship and how you see the other person.
That is true.
And that is what we talked about with Figs of Solomon. If you haven't listened to Why Couples Fight, the last podcast, he talks about that. He talks about, if you and your partner get into an argument over whatever, the more information you share outside of your marriage, and if you're sharing intimate information with your parents and your friends about what a terrible person your partner is, what a terrible whatever, that's going to affect how you guys come back together if you do have an argument. And so I think that's something that it's something it's very hard to learn in your relationship. But as you kind of progress, if you're doing the work, you're going to, go, oh, wait, this is a boundary I'm overstepping.
And at first it might not I feel so good. It's almost like gossip. And I think that it's okay to have an outlet, like a close friend that's trusted, or especially a therapist. That's totally fine to share how you feel. But just know that it does sometimes make you view the other person in a bad light. I can speak from my own experience that I did that to you. Sorry.
It's fine. It's fine.
I would complain and vent, and I would not always get the response back that I needed. I would get the response back that felt good because they would like side with me, or they would say, yeah, he is like too controlling, or that, and I would just, it probably wasn't the best thing for me to hear, but, I had that voice in the back of my head thinking, I know I need to just talk this through with my spouse. I know I need to go to him and we need to figure this out together. And so, yeah, but also being in therapy at the same time, I think helped us through those difficult, challenging times. But I think that in that class, we didn't really learn about boundaries with one another. And we felt we fought, we had to just stick it out and slug it out.
Die on our heel.
And listen to each other. And there were times where I was like ready to stop. We weren't going to ever come to a resolution that in the next hour or two. And I remember having one therapist tell us that it's okay to like say, pause, I'm leaving, I need to cool down. Because sometimes in arguments we get really heightened and our emotional buttons are pushed, that our insecurities and all those things, and it's like the dragons are out in full force, and you have to push pause on that so that you can like come back to like what the other person really is, not the monster. The other person is my spouse that I married, that I love, but we are both heightened right now. And that for us has become a boundary because, and I will tell you when we can't keep talking further because we're just wounding each other more. And the other person, and sometimes we'll even use that wording that this is a boundary for me. I need to push pause and I need to calm down, and you need to respect that. And the other person then is supposed to respect it and say, okay, let's figure this out later. Let's come back in an hour. Or if you're really heightened and the other person is even saying names or saying words that are really hurtful and damaging, or, slaying your character in some way, which we both have been guilty of, that can also be a boundary where you say, this is a boundary for me. I will not listen to this. I don't want to keep listening to this. And I am going to either hang up the phone right now. And this is also what the holistic psychologist who we follow on Instagram said too. I think recently in her boundaries post, it was like, it can be done in love, and boundaries really are about love.
And I think what's really hard, especially now with everything that our whole culture is set up to share everything, like to share what we're doing, like, whether it's social media, YouTube, whatever, Facebook. We now are a culture of sharing our thoughts, our ideas, or whatever. The hard part is when you're in relationship with someone else. It's easy to share when there's no ramifications. If you're just putting something out there on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. The hardest part is sharing with each other what is really hurting each other. And like what boundaries we're crossing, and there's been times where we've even had this conversation where you've said, hey, is it okay to share this on social media or whatever? Right. And I'm like, no, I think we shouldn't, because I think that could, it's right. We need to have boundaries, not to hurt other people or hurt our spouses, but to help protect us.
Yeah.
As a unit, as a couple, as a family.
Right.
And that's something that is kind of a whole new ground now,
Oh yeah, we have to have conversations about, are you gonna? Can I post this? Can I post a picture of our child? Can I post? You definitely have to have those conversations now. which is probably hopefully they rewrote the curriculum in that, because there's so many different areas where you need to talk about, like, before you get married, how are we going to deal with this? How are we going to, do this or that? But specifically setting boundaries, I liked how you mentioned in the beginning that it would have been helpful to talk about, well, what did your family look like growing up in terms of boundaries? Like, what did your family, how did you guys talk about? And a lot of these words weren't around, I feel like, when we were growing up. They weren't buzzwords. They weren't really talked about. I didn't realize.
It wasn't even a thought.
Right. I didn't realize. But what is talked about, it's called the emotional, what is it called?
Emotional intelligence?
It's about, like, the emotional intelligence of your family, but it's how emotionally available was your family growing up? How did they deal with emotions is another way to talk about it. Were they allowed in your family? Were they not? So, like, in my family, we were very open. We were open in all ways. Like, all emotions were accepted. I was not afraid to tell my dad and mom when I felt depressed in high school, which I think was so valuable. But then on the flip side, and I'm learning this now as a 37-year-old adult, that my family did not have very strong boundaries. We said yes to everything. We wanted to help everybody. We let everybody into our home. And now I'm realizing that that is not how I would probably do things now. Like, I would probably have a little bit more boundaries in protecting my time with my family. I would be protecting my kids a little bit more, and not to, like, say anything bad about my mom and dad, but we're just now learning the boundary part of, like, I can say that in love, that I'm like, no, sorry, we can't come to that event. We really just need a break with our family. And I think too, like, the whole thing with boundaries across the board, it's time, it's money, it's friendships, it's relationships, it's family. You have to establish, like, hey, like, and there's been plenty of times Chrissy and I have had conflict, and I could have probably told my mom or whatever, like, oh, I can't believe she did this, whatever. And I'm like, no, you know what? I don't think that's going to be good. I don't think that's not going to help. That's not going to help the situation any better. Yeah.
And so I would rather, and that's my family of origin too, though, is we're a little less open. And so I'm a guy, so it's a little more, it's easier for me to have those boundaries. But I've also seen what happens if you just say yes to everything.
Right.
Like you end up doing 100 things that you really don't want to do just because you said yes. So for me, like, I'm always like, okay, does this work for us? Is this part of, does this work for our family? And the whole thing with boundaries too, they never talked about boundaries with having kids. And, like, okay, hey, in your premarital class, you're both going to become person. Well, when you multiply, which we have, now we also have to have boundaries of, like, no, we're not going to their so-and-so's birthday party in their house because we have something else we already said we're going to do. No matter how many kicking, screaming, it's like, you want to teach your kids that, hey, it's okay to say no, and you can do it with love and have this, like, no, that hurts me. I don't like that.
How would you say that we have set boundaries or realized that's a boundary? Because I think people don't always understand, well, how do I know when I need to set a boundary?
Okay.
And for me, I would say when I feel something deeply, kind of like almost in your gut, and you're like, that
what
brings...
Is called intuition.
It's called intuition, yes. But when it brings up something in me, like, I can remember one time being at dinner with your family, who we absolutely love. But I'm a therapist, so I saw the whole family dynamic play out. I saw Sam become the person that he's the role that he's played in his family that really isn't necessarily him, but he goes and snaps back into that role of being the peacemaker and being the one that makes everybody laugh. I call him, like, he's like the homeostasis barometer of his family. He keeps everybody laughing, he fills the space, and that has been his role. But sometimes he becomes the jokester or the person that, like, or the joker, I should say, that people can laugh at. And I saw, because I know my husband, I saw it hurting him, and I started to get angry. And we sat through it. And I'm so mad after that we sat through that dinner and that I didn't say anything. And that is how I knew after that a boundary had been crossed, because I was like, I will never sit through a dinner like that again where you are the one getting made fun of.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. And of course, like, I was like way more, angry and all that stuff. But then I was like, okay, boundaries don't need to be done out of anger. Next time we could just simply say, hey, that's hurtful.
And I think and going back to the premarital class, like, they used boundaries as like they were bad. It was like this, they didn't talk about like, these are actually good things. You know, it was like, because when we hear boundaries, we hear the word, just even as a person, it's like,
think of a wall.
It's like, oh gosh, like, what can I not do? It's like, this is going to be terrible because I can't do what I want. Like, I think it's the complete opposite.
Right.
And you know what I think? And as you were talking, I was thinking, boundaries, if you say yes to something and you go to do that thing and you don't want to do it, well, I got news for you. You crossed your own boundary and you said yes to something that you have no interest in doing, but you were trying to appease someone. And so instead of having that boundary, like, no, that's not going to work for me.
Or I'm not going to sit through a dinner where I feel like I'm the joker. I feel like a boundary, and this is how my therapist has explained it for me, is that it is, I love you enough and I love me enough to not allow you to talk to me that way anymore.
Yes.
So I'm going to, exit out right now. I'm going to leave the party, or we're not going to be able to make it. All of those things are done out of love for yourself and for the other person, or for the relationship. So that's what I like to think of boundaries now, as like so much love for yourself.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And if you can't have love for yourself, you cannot truly have love for the other person, I feel like.
You're right.
In a healthy way. So.
What do you think? Was that?
I was just thinking mic drop.
I know. I mean, what I think, we just want to encourage anyone who's been in any kind of relationship, if you can examine, if you keep failing in one part of your relationship, well, I have news. There's probably a boundary you're crossing, or you're not putting up enough boundaries to allow the outside influences affect who you are, your relationship. And I mean, this is something that always comes up with any kind of relationship, is other people's opinion, your mother-in-law, your father, whatever, and that's the whole thing. Take apart and look at the family of origin system that you grew up in. I never liked when my parents did that. I never liked when we went there, or we said yes to those people that, had made me feel uncomfortable. When you're in a relationship with someone else, and it's crucial with children. When you have children, it's super crucial, because then you have to be like, okay, I have to set up these boundaries so that the kids know, like, hey, you can't eat cookies for dinner because you're going to get a stomachache. It's all learning these boundaries. But what I always try and tell people is, like, look at what you grew up in, and remember, whatever you grew up in, if there was stuff you didn't like, this is your chance to change it with your significant other.
Right. I totally agree. And I would just wanted to speak to, like, if you feel like right now in your relationship that you are being belittled, that you feel like you're not heard or recognized, or
seen as a person.
Yeah, or I just feel like if you are not being like heard in your relationship, then maybe you guys do need to have a discussion about, like, what is okay to say to you, because it might not feel I don't know what I'm trying to say here. I'm trying to say, like, you might need to have a discussion about, it is no longer okay for you to compare me to your mother. It's no longer okay for you to hold me up against, an impossible example of what you want me to be. This is who I am. And I do not like talking about, X, Y, and Z, or, those are the types of boundaries we're saying that you can make within your relationship and have open discussions about what's okay for you and what's not okay.
And you can do it out of love. And it will take practice.
Right, yeah.
And you're gonna, if you're just like, all of a sudden you try and do a 180 turn from like who you were, it's gonna take work. Yeah. And you're gonna have to also say to your significant other, go, hey, you know what, this has made me uncomfortable for a really long time. Like, I think I'm gonna start changing the way we do this.
Right.
And not just blindside your partner, but talk about it openly. Mm-hmm. If you have trouble talking about it, write it down so that you can clarify your thought and go, hey, this is a way that I can change this, the way that I'm thinking. And because for some people, it's very scary. It's almost traumatic to try to voice who they really are.
Yeah. Oh, we got married and I was fine with opening up and sharing everything. And Sam was like, I think it took him years and years for him to truly be like, this is safe, I can be me. But also it took years of personal development to realize certain parts of yourself.
Yeah.
And then to be able to verbalize that to me.
You have to make small steps to make the big change. And it's really important, I think, there's always one partner that is far better about talking about how they feel.
Yeah.
This always is. And so for the partner that has trouble, and which is is usually the emotional withdrawer, that's like the technical term in a family system, the person that has trouble talking about it should write down how they feel so that they can clarify their thoughts. Because it's very easy to get overwhelmed when the other person's like, well, just tell me how you feel. Just tell me how you feel. And you're like, I don't even know. I don't even know.
Yeah. That was usually what you would say to me.
Yes, because...
And you still do sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes.
Remember that one time? A couple weeks ago or months ago?
Yes.
We talked about it in the last episode. We don't need to go into it. But basically, I now know, okay, that's, I will not talk to him in a way that makes him feel like he has to work for my love.
Yes.
So, and we figured that out through trial and error. So if you guys feel like you're in a hard place, it's okay.
Everyone's in a hard place at one point.
Right, but I feel like if your relationship is not where you want it to be, use this as a learning experience to say, okay, we're not where we want to be. Just like we said in the last episode, that's an okay thing because it means you want to be in a better place. It means you want to be connected to your partner, and use this as like, okay, we will not always be here in this bad place. We will be in this place where we openly talk to one another and we can have enough confidence to say that's not okay. You can't talk to me like that. Yeah. You cannot call me that name. Mm-hmm. You cannot say that about my character. Mm-hmm. And then the other person can say, wow, okay, I'm so sorry. I respect that, because we both are respecting each other. All right. Thank you guys again so much for listening. I hope that this episode shed some light on how we view boundaries and how you can incorporate those into your life now, as well as your relationship, in order to make your relationship safer for both partners. So send us your requests, send us your questions. We love hearing from you guys. Thank you so much for tagging us on Instagram. I am at Chrissy J. Powers, and you can hashtag SureBabePodcast, and we will see your posts and respond to them. Thank you guys so much for the rates and reviews on iTunes and wherever you're listening. We truly do appreciate them. And just thank you for being you, and keep shining your light.